This video, I'd like to talk about active listening. Before we get to the specifics, though, let me ask you this. Does this remind you of active listening? Does this make you think of what kind of listening is this when the person's kind of staring off into space, maybe daydreaming? Is that appropriate for active listening, would you say? Or how about this? How much active listening do you think is going on here as opposed to how much listening related to defending yourself and just coming up with the next response and not really focusing on what the other person is saying, but focusing on your own personal responses? Is that active listening? Or finally, is this active listening? Does this give you the impression of active listening? Somebody that's really zoned in, paying attention, focused on what the other person is saying? Well, yes, this would be the most, as far as we can tell, the most identifiable instance of active listening of the ones that I showed you. So let's take a look at what we mean by active listening. Active listening, first of all, is providing full focus and concentration on the words, nonverbal behaviors, and other contextual clues provided by the sender in an effort to understand, respond to, and remember what is being said. So that's a mouthful, but basically what we're getting at here is that active listening takes in the whole context, not just what the person is saying, but how they're saying it, what they're doing nonverbally in that instance, and everything else related to that situation. It takes it all in, right? And our goal here is to not just understand, but also to respond to and remember what is being said. I mean, there's a lot happening in active listening. So to focus in on this, we want to focus on the 3 A's of active listening: attention, attitude, and adjustment. And so just a couple tips here that I want to give you about the 3 A's of active listening and how we can pursue active listening through these 3 A's. First of all, we want to provide our attention to the speaker. We want to face that person. Make sure that we're facing that person. We want to maintain eye contact with that person. Although, again, not in a creepy way. You don't want to just bore in on them and stare at them like this, but really overall, we should have eye contact with them more than anything else. We don't want to interrupt. Let that person speak. We want to take it in. We want to try and understand it and process it. And while we're doing that, we can paint a mental picture that can help us listen actively. As that person is talking, we can kind of construct what they're saying in our mind in an effort to help us understand that more thoroughly and more effectively. Right? So we want to give this person our full attention. That's the short end of this. We want to give them our full attention during the duration of what they're saying. We also need to think about our attitude. As we enter into active listening, we need to think about our attitude. We want to use empathy and try and take their perspective as much as possible. We want to ask questions only to clarify, not to expand into different areas of conversation or different things like that. Ask questions only to clarify what they're saying. If there's something you don't understand, ask a question about it. But otherwise, limit our questions. Don't impose your solution. It's a natural tendency for some of us to kind of say, well, here's what I would do in this situation, or here's what I think you ought to do, or here's a potential solution. Lots of times people don't want us to fix it, and they certainly don't want us to fix it if we don't understand it fully. So for the moment, we're not going to impose our solution. We're going to listen fully so that we understand the situation and what that person is saying. And then we're going to reflect on that. We're going to really give it some thought. We're going to think. And it doesn't mean we have to think for days or weeks or whatever, but we need to really reflect and be thoughtful before we respond. Okay, so we're going to take some time to reflect. So our attitudes need to be in the proper place for that. That's not necessarily those things that I mentioned here and that you see here are not necessarily our natural disposition, right? It's not something that necessarily comes easily to us or naturally to us. So we need to be intentional about getting our attitude in the right place for active listening. And getting in that mindset of we're going to use empathy. We're going to not ask questions and interrupt unless we have something that we need to clarify. I'm going to not impose my solution. I'm going to take time to reflect here. Get the proper attitude for this situation. Okay. So we're going to give that person our attention. We're going to have our attitude in the correct spot here. And then finally, we're going to be willing to adjust. We're going to work at adjustment. We're going to keep an open mind. We're not going to, again, narrow in on one solution of this thing. We're going to keep an open mind and be willing to change our perspective as we hear that person talk. We may enter this with some feeling or some idea about how we think this is going to go, and then the discussion goes in a completely different direction. We have to keep an open mind and be willing to adjust and go with it, go with the flow in that sense, right? We're not going to interpret things. We're not going to, again, lay our own assumptions on what this person is saying. If we have we're going to take it at face value. We're going to try and build that mental picture. And if we have a lack of understanding about something they're saying, we can clarify that. But we don't just want to interpret, oh, what they really meant by that is this. When they say this word, what they really mean is this. This is code for something else. We're going to take them at face value, not interpret in active listening. We're going to pay attention to nonverbals. So it's not just the words that they're saying, it's how are they saying it? At what rate are they speaking? What kind of volume are they using? We're going to pay attention to those types of things. We're going to pay attention to their facial expressions and their gestures and their overall posture. We're going to pay attention to where they're talking to us about this. Is it a public place? Is it a private setting? That tells us something about the message as well. So we're going to adjust all these things. And as we see their nonverbals, we're going to go with the flow there as well. And we may offer feedback. Then we can offer feedback, but we're not going to lay our own solution on that. We can offer feedback when it's requested and when it's clear that that feedback is welcomed. But we need to be able to adjust as well and say, is this an appropriate situation for me to provide feedback? Okay. So those are the principles of active listening, right? Attention, attitude, and adjustment. When we can get the three of those things to come together, then we have the makings of active listening. When we can provide that person with our attention, when our attitude is in the correct space for active listening, and when we can be able to make those adjustments and move with the conversation, go with the flow in that regard, we can engage in active listening, which can be a really powerful tool for us, not just in the workplace and not just in a sense of professionalism and professional presence, but also in our personal relationships. Active listening can be a real asset to us. So again, consider those things, the 3 A's of active listening. Next time we need to engage in active listening, remember that I need to give this person my attention. I need to adjust my attitude and get in the right headspace for active listening. And then I need to be able to and willing to adjust and go with the flow of that conversation, depending on what's needed there. If you have questions about active listening or anything else related to professional presence, I'm always happy to respond to emails, so feel free to shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, get out there and really focus in, develop and practice those active listening skills, and see how that fits in to your overall sense of professional presence.